Good morning, folks. How many people got to boot camp this morning? All right, impressive. Not me. I was practicing my Keynote, so hopefully that was worthwhile. All right, so let me start by asking you all a question. What is it you expect the Google login box to look like if you hit it on a mobile device? You're probably used to seeing something like this, like you see in a lot of applications. Email field, password, create account, sign in, forgot password. And if it was another application, you probably see all these UX options, plus buttons to log in with Google, log in with Facebook, et cetera. But if you haven't noticed, if you go to the Google login box recently, it looks like this. All we ask for is what identifier do you want to use with services at Google? And you notice there is no password field. We as an identity community, we talk a lot about getting rid of passwords. It's sort of hard to do that if we have password fields right in our main entryway. So there are a lot of reasons that we've done this, and I'll have a chance to talk about a few of them today, but we call this an identifier first flow. So one example of the value proposition is a use case this audience should understand. That's the enterprise SaaS use case. So a lot of companies, they use Google for our Gmail email outsourcing service or Google Docs collaboration service, and some of those companies run their own identity provider, say using vendors here. If in the past one of your users ended up at a Google login box, especially on mobile, we found a very high percentage of them would type their email address, and then they type their corporate password into the Google login box, which probably isn't what you want. It's not what we want either. It's a confusing user experience for the users. So now, all they have to do is type their identifier. We'll figure out intelligently they have an IDP, bounce them to that. If they're on their desktop, this is a great experience because they're usually logged into the identity provider. They just get bounced back immediately, and voila, they're into Google and off and ready to go. Things get a little bit more complicated on mobile, though. In particular, let's say a user is setting up a new phone. At that point, they're obviously not logged into their identity provider. And so if it's, say, a new Android phone and they go to log into Google, they'll type their email address, and sure, we'll figure out they have an identity provider, and we'll bounce them over to it via SAML. But then they'll usually see a screen like the one in the middle, where they have to type their email address again or the username again. This type of thing, to be honest, just makes us as an identity community look a little silly. So in the OpenID Connect space, we added some improvements, and in particular a trick we call the identifier hint, where the relying party can take the identifier it already has from the user that I got in this first screen and just pass it as a parameter to the identity provider. And the identity provider in this use case can just use it to pre-fill the login box. It's a small thing, but we're going to talk later about how this same trick enables a bunch of other powerful user experience features. Now, I'd like to say not only did we get rid of the password field, but we got rid of passwords for all our users. I have a little bit more work to do there. But for the majority of our users now, we actually do risk-based authentication. By that I mean most of our users, we have a phone number or we know other devices that they use. So even if they haven't signed up for our strict two-factor authentication, if there's any risk signals in the login flow, we make them not just type their email address and password, but we'll make them go and get an OTP on a phone or send it via SMS, or maybe, as you're seeing in more and more places, just pop up a message on their phone asking them to approve login. Now this is good because it started to raise the security bar. But let me ask a question. How many of you all saw the white paper we put out in the fall about phishing of OTPs? Y'all are a sophisticated audience? Okay, a couple people out there who are probably very depressed because if you read those papers, we showed visual examples of sites we're seeing that are phishing users for not just their email address and password, but also their OTPs. And these are examples not just targeting Google, but other large consumer and enterprise sites. And it's gotten even worse since then. We're now seeing that the phishers can pretty successfully phish for an OTP just about as easily as a password. And then they do break into your account. They use those OTPs pretty much immediately. And so we've talked a lot about the security advantage we got from multi-factor authentication and OTPs over SMS and whatnot. It bought us some time, but to be honest, these hackers are back. They figured out those tricks, and we're not providing as much security as we'd like to think. They do this not just in targeted phishing, but even large-scale targeted phishing just across millions of users. So we have to do better than that. The multi-factor auth with OTP isn't enough. So how many of y'all have now learned what FIDO is? Okay, if you haven't, and you care about account security, please do. This is where Google and other companies are spending a lot of effort trying to figure out how we can have phishing-proof authentication schemes. If you're not aware, Google has actually started to make this available, unfortunately only on Chrome browsers on the desktop. But you can connect a USB-based FIDO-enabled token from vendors like YubiKey to your Google account. And if you go in and log in a Chrome browser, type your email address, type your password, instead of sending an OTP to a device that might be phished, we ask you to plug in the USB device, and it can send a cryptographic signal to us proving that that other, the thing you have really, in fact, is there. Now, if we stopped at just doing this for Chrome and browsers, that wouldn't be particularly helpful. That's why we're involved in the standards communities, so that hopefully the same thing can be adopted by other operating systems and other browsers. But then there's the whole mobile world to play with. But there's been some nice progress there. So as an example, some of you all may have seen a screen like the one on the left if you set up a new Android phone recently, or in some cases, we'll give you the option of saying, oh, you're trying to set up that account on this device? Well, we're pretty sure you already have an Android phone. Why don't you just tap the two together, and we'll just use an NFC bump to bootstrap a process. Once we do that, we use a FIDO-based cryptographic technique to then prove that old device is already there. And we're working to contribute our learnings to the FIDO community to standardize both an NFC and even Bluetooth variant of the FIDO protocol. And we're now in early stages of being able to support a different flow where we'll see, oh, you have an NFC-enabled secure key for your account. So when you're setting up your phone, we'll just ask you to tap that to your device. And each of these flows, if you're going through it, is protected against phishing. So this is actually good. In addition to this, we're even giving our enterprise customers the ability to just do lifecycle management for these security keys, require them for their employees, require their use in certain scenarios. And our hope is in the future we'll add additional platforms so your enterprises can at least stop worrying about phishing if they're taking advantage of these flows. So that's good news on the enterprise space. But what about the consumer space? Well, unfortunately, in this area, more and more of our users, a surprisingly high percentage, only interact with Google via their mobile phone. And so we have to worry about the scenario where they're replacing their phone, in particular, where they broke their old phone and they're trying to set up a new phone. Now, in that case, they can't take their old phone and click it to their new phone to get it bootstrapped. That wouldn't work. And obviously, getting them all to buy these specialized USB, NFC security tokens is going to be difficult at best. Now, many people would say, oh, wait, why is that hard? If the user's setting up a new device, just send a one-time code to the phone number on that device. Well, this is a pretty sophisticated audience. Many of you all probably know why that doesn't work, but let me explain for those who might not. Let me tell you what the hackers do. So the hacker, he goes and gets himself an Android phone or iPhone. He phishes, say, Sarah, that he's trying to target, for her username and password. Great, types it into the phone he controls. That sends a signal to Google. Google says, all right, but I want more confidence. Let me send a one-time code to Sarah's phone number. And we do, but that goes to her current device. But Google has no way of knowing that. The phisher phishes her for that OTP, types it into the phone he controls, and voila, he's into her account. So as long as we're using OTP over SMS as a fallback for bootstrapping into accounts, the hackers are just going to keep driving a Mack truck back through that door. So we need something stronger than that. Now, on the technical side, there are many proposals for how carriers can provide cryptographic proof that a device they know is associated with a particular phone number. Actually, multiple proposals. But we don't really think of this as a technical problem. We think of this as a business problem, because one of the questions is how much should the carriers be compensated for this? For example, we've relied on sending OTP messages over SMS, and they get some money for delivering those SMS messages. So we are doing our best to try to work with carriers who want to be involved in providing this type of account security to their users. And we certainly hope in the future that this will be an option available to users. But if not, then we'll be continue to focus more on these separate specialized tokens that you'll use in these flows. Now, I talked a lot about flows where the user started by just trying to get directly into Google services. You went and got an Android phone, or you went to gmail.com or youtube.com. But we also provide API access to our services. So one example is via IMAP for mail access, but we also have our proprietary APIs like YouTube. And I'm happy to say that as of now, by default, we just block all password access to our APIs on all our accounts. If you want to, you can go and turn off that security, but it's on by default for all of our accounts. Now, it took us years to get this change in place, not because we lacked the technology. We've had OAuth for a while. But we had to go to every vendor outside Google who used our APIs and ask, pressure, bully, hit them over the head a few times to switch to OAuth. But we now have done that for at least what we consider all the large, interesting applications. Even major applications like Apple's iOS and Mac OS client have switched to OAuth. And as most of you all know, this is incredibly powerful and necessary for us if we're going to do things like multi-factor authentication, either the two-step verification or risk-based authentication. It also lets me use the identifier first trick that I talked about for improving user experience and the other value props I'll talk later that it brings. It also is a prerequisite for us using these FIDO-based authentication schemes. So thank you to any of you in the audience who were involved in making those changes, and I'm sorry if I beat you up. Not too sorry, actually. So I talked a lot here about techniques that can help you as a user or employee get into Google services. But the reason we spend so much time on the Internet Standards is, funny enough, we're not just interested in Google services. For the 10 plus years I've been in Google, most of that time I reported to our search organization. And the pressure to me was always, Eric, you got to get rid of the friction and sign up and sign in on the entire web, because our business is about connecting users to new sites and applications they've never been to before. And if the first thing they hit is a screen like the second one here, that's not a great experience, right? Well, let's talk about that. Let's say you are trying to build an application that targets consumers, and some user hits it on a mobile device, and they have to hit a registration screen like the second one. Now you're making your users on these tiny little keyboards type their first name, last name, email address, maybe email address again, password, maybe password again. If they manage to get through all that, then you probably send them an email verification link. They got to go dig around, find that, click it, which normally, for some reason, takes them to a web page, not to the app, so they have to go back to the app. It's amazing. Anybody does registration on a mobile device. So we've been trying to figure out how to take the learnings from the identity community and apply it for applications like this. And let me talk about a few tricks. So anybody here get a chance to go to Google I/O? I wasn't privileged enough. Nope, OK, well, we're not cool, I guess. So, dang. So there's a feature we announced at Google I/O called Smart Lock for Passwords API. And what it does is, let's say the same application, it gets launched by a user, no one's logged in. What the application can do is ask via the Smart Lock API to invoke an account user. And what the user will see is a screen like the one on the left, where the operating system will show the email addresses it's seen the user most commonly use on this device, along with name and photo if that's available. And if the user clicks one of these entries, that information is passed as strings, nothing cryptographic at this point, to the application, which might, for example, use it to pre-fill part of a registration flow. So this is obviously a huge usability improvement. Now, some of you may have actually noticed we already provide this type of experience on many of Google's own applications, both on the desktop and on mobile. So you might launch the YouTube application for iOS, and the first time you do, you'll tend to see a screen like this. So we've learned a lot from playing around with this user experience. But interestingly, our main original ideas for this case came out of the OpenID Foundation's Account Chooser Working Group. And the accountchooser.com, if you all aren't familiar with it, is a service operated by the OpenID Foundation that on all modern browsers provides an API that functionally does the same thing as what we're shown here on the left. Now, typing your email address on a desktop browser, it's not that bad, so the value proposition is sort of but being able to avoid typing it on a mobile device is even more powerful. Now, let's say the user gets through these first and two stages. They pick the account they want to use. They submit a registration form, and they did have to pick the password they want to use. The next thing that the Smart Lock API offers is a way for the application to prompt the OS, say, why don't you ask the user if they want to save this password? And so they see a screen like the one on the right. Now, you guys are an advanced audience, so I want to question, this is not one of those super advanced password managers doing custom passphrases and auto password generation and enterprise password management, because no offense, everybody understands how to do that stuff. At this point, our goal is to focus on the common use cases and get feedback not just from users, but also application developers. Because unlike on the web, application developers actually have to make some changes to get this to work. And some of the Google members here have been involved in this. I have to be honest, we've been flabbergasted by the level of interest in this. It's like Netflix, LinkedIn, New York Times, Evite, Orbitz, a whole bunch of others have done this because they see the value in their improved user experience for the users, both registration and return user flows. Now, let's say that user does come back and they launch the same app, but on another device, maybe on a tablet, an Android TV, if you buy one of those. I never have. Or they just get a new phone in the future. Well, in this case, the application does the same thing. It calls this API and tries to invoke the account user. But in this case, the operating system says, I can do better than that. I don't even need to show that because I already know the user's preferred email address and potentially password. I can just pass that to the app. The app can log in the user, and great, zero-click return login experience. So we'll talk more about this. One of the unfortunate things is in this space, we really don't have good standards for password managers. The account user API is the start of standardizing account managers, and it starts to look like there may be some nice links between account managers and password managers. But this space of password manager standardization is an opportunity for the future. There is an early credentials draft proposal in the Web Application Security Group with IETF if you're interested in looking into that. OK, up to this point, I spent a lot of time talking about just how to get rid of the password field. But another thing that we never showed in this point was sign-up button. So we've done a lot of UX testing, and combined with these other tricks, if you try any of Google's major properties, even big ones like YouTube, you notice there is no sign-up button. There's just a sign-in button. And if you click it, you're going to see one of two things. Either an account user, whenever we can show it, because we always find that performs better, or this identifier first flow. No matter what the user does, the output of this is an identifier where I can then look at it and say, well, should I route the user to a registration flow or to a sign-in flow? The registration flow is pretty obvious, but the sign-in flow is interesting because once the users type that identifier, all of a sudden I can look at 3 sets of information. I can look at what account they're trying to get into, what are the capabilities and information about the current device, and what are the capabilities of maybe the mobile phone that I can detect that the user has. And now I can intelligently suggest to the user what are the most secure and possibly easiest ways to get the user logged in. Maybe it is with a Bluetooth-enabled security key. Maybe, bumper, it's with a password. Maybe it's a password with an OTP. But I get to be a lot more flexible in my approach here. And we think these techniques work not just well for Google, but for other applications. As I said, those applications on the desktop, they can invoke accountuser.com. On Android, they can invoke the account user. Or to be honest, forget all that. They can just start with an identifier first flow like Google has done. And once you've gotten that user's identifier, you can decide which of 3 paths to run them down. A registration flow like the one in the top, or in the middle, maybe you handle authentication for the user. Or in the best case, maybe there is a known identity provider for that account, and the application can just simply bounce the user there, and they come back and they're logged in with that one-click experience. But if you combine this with that Smart Lock for Passwords API, then in both the second and third case, the user doesn't even see any UX, and the application either gets the email address and password and auto-logs the user in, or gets just their email address, does a server-side database lookup to find their identity provider, sends them there, and they come back. And so for both the second and third case, it is a consumer, zero-click, single sign-on experience. And that's the type of experience that I could be proud of. So let me have Pam Dingle come up now and show some other demos of how this works.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pam. I think most of you probably have met me already. So what Eric's been talking about, you might all want to write off and say that's all proprietary. It's a single thing. Obviously, that's not the case. So what I want to show today is the work that we've done with our systems to do exactly the same thing, all using standards. So this is going to be a very quick run through a not live demo, because I don't know how many people were here for the live demo fiasco of 2012. So yeah, we've learned. But here's what you're going to see. You're going to see there's really 3 pieces of technology that Eric's been talking about. He's been talking about login hint, which is a feature of the OpenID Connect standard. He's talking about identifier first flows, and he's talking about account chooser. So we have a video here, if you guys want to load the video. All right, so this is Hipsta Bank. Hipsta Bank has a corporate customer called Integral Curve. And Alice Smith is going to log into Integral Curve using the first step of an identifier first flow here, right? So this is user discovery at the service provider. She hits go. A login hint gets sent, second half of an identifier first flow, right? She doesn't have to type her email again, hits her password, says login. She's going to agree to the OpenID Connect permissions, the OAuth permissions. She's logged in, but now she's going to be asked if she wants to store an account record in a chooser, right? So everything's there. She just needs to verify it, click on it to consent it being stored in her local browser. And that entry is now something she can recognize and choose at multiple websites. So she's going to click on that here, and now she's logged in, right? So that's the bootstrap flow, and that's pretty simple. But now, here's her logging in, actually, on an everyday basis. This is what it's going to look like. She's going to hit the login button. She's not going to have to type her email address or her username whatsoever. She's challenged to choose a record from the chooser. She's going to click the one she's familiar with. She's taken to the second step of the identifier first flow, where she types her password and clicks login, and she's logged in. So that was initiate with one click, choose your username with one click, type your password, and you're logged in. So that's the experience that we are going for. So yes, as you can see, all of that was done with standards. That was OpenID Connect. That was accountchooser.com. So that's something that you can write into your websites today. All right, I have one other demo. So if you think of what we saw a signal, right? Two domains collaborating by sending a signal from the service provider to the identity provider in order to simplify the user experience. So in the next video, you're going to see a signal sent in the opposite direction. So go ahead and roll that second video. All right, so in this case, Alice is again going to log into Hipsta Bank on one device. She's logged in, she has a session. However, in another domain, she's also got other sessions and other tokens, right? So as your users travel through all these domains, their mobile devices. So in this case, she's got Google Drive, and this is on a different device, in demo land. And so she's accumulated all of these tokens that have all been linked to her original primary credential. Now she's going to change that primary credential. And the policy for the corporation is, when you change the primary credential, you kill everything, right? This is out of band of authentication. She's not logging in right now, right? So all of these sessions have been created and exist. What we want is for a signal manager, which is what you're seeing here, to pick up on the fact that the password's been changed and distribute a reset password signal to all the domains, right? Those domains then act on that signal in the way they feel best to expire or get rid of their tokens. So now what you can see is, over time, as Alice goes back to her devices and tries to reuse all of her sessions, that they have timed out, right? And she's going to have to go back, and she's going to have to type her new primary credential in order to get those tokens back. So what you just saw there was a signal being sent, right? Being generated once, being disseminated to multiple domains, being interpreted, right? They don't have to act on those signals, but they could. And most importantly, this is all out-of-the-box stuff, right? So the stuff I used here works today. I used Drupal for the Hipsta Bank site with an OpenID Connect module that I pulled off the internet, literally, and modified only slightly. I used Ping Federate 8.0 for the login forms and for the provisioning stuff. Google Apps offers an API that will let you kill those tokens on command. And Confirm Signal Manager was what I used to distribute the signals. So there you go. You can have it today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pam. We started a few minutes late, and I don't want to eat too much into Bob's presentation, so I'm going to do the fast version of the next few slides, because I wasn't going fast enough earlier, right? OK. We spent the last few minutes talking about a scenario where a user goes to an application or a site where they have been registered. And we talked about using identity providers and re-authenticating with passwords. But let's say it's the scenario where the user goes and visits an app where they've never been registered. And in my previous examples, I showed the person going there, using an account chooser identifier first, and getting dropped on a screen where they had to fill out a registration form and a password. But more and more apps are showing a screen like the second one, where they have the option not just to create a password, but maybe to use a popular identity provider like Facebook or Google. And yes, I work for Google, so I like seeing the second option. And if you all don't know, that we have two variants of our login option. If you're a very social-oriented site, you tend to see a red Google Plus button. If you're just trying to do basic login, then there's the blue Google button. If the user clicks Google, now you would generally expect to see an OAuth consent flow. However, in more and more places, you're going to see a screen like the third one, where the UX we, as Google, use to get that consent is an account chooser style visual experience, where we ask the user to give consent by just choosing the account that they want to use. Because at the end of the day, the only information that Google is sending to the identifier is exactly what you see here. So we will give exactly what you click. And that flow will get you registered, but it obviously looks a little wacky, right? Account chooser, buttons, and then a smaller account chooser. So can't we do better than that? Well, let's throw the identifier hint trick in here, where the user, they use that account chooser or they type the identifier they want to use, and it's passed to the site. Well, Pam showed how the site can use that to find an identifier for a registered user. What if it just looks at that email domain and says, oh, wait, I know a OpenID Connect identifier for that domain, whether it's a school, an enterprise, or even a consumer webmail domain. So the app can just immediately bounce over to that identifier. But what it does now is it passes a hint. Here's the email address that the user's already consented to share with me, and I don't want to know anything other than, is that active on the device, yes or no? And so now the identifier can do another trick with OpenID Connect called fast identifier verification, where if the identifier does see an active account for that address on the device, it can just respond back immediately, yes, with a valid OpenID Connect assertion. And if not, then it will just start a login flow for the user. And so you get a one-click registration experience here. Now, we do all this not just for desktop browsers, but hopefully many of y'all are starting to hear about NAPS, which is a standard way to do this between mobile application and device. And since it's built on top of OpenID Connect, all these tricks like identifier hint and fast identifier verification work as well. So we have a lot of tricks here. Not all the identity providers out there support all these things. So some of y'all may have heard the OpenID Foundation and OIX have a way for identity providers to list the profiles of OpenID Connect that they've been certified that they support. Google is one of those who's done that. And right now that's available for some basic features of OpenID Connect. In the future, we hope to do it for more. So if you take all the different tricks that we implemented, all you have to do as an application developer is build that. Yeah. And that's the subset of what you actually have to build. Oh, and there's some IDP variants. Oh, and I've got some more tricks coming for you in the future. Right? So the reality is, Google, we all like to complain about the toxic waste dump of the sites out there who we want to get out of the password business. But honestly, getting the user experience of this to work well is incredibly hard, and very few application developers are going to put the multiple person years of work needed to implement all this stuff. And it requires doing a lot of UX stuff. Like, how many of you all write UX UI? Probably not many, right? So Google has been getting more and more aggressive, and you're going to see us get more aggressive still, about promoting the idea that application developers should just get out of the login business entirely and use what we refer to as a login as a service provider. Someone who's going to run their entire login system. I mean passwords, registration, change email, change password, add IDPs, link IDPs, change IDPs. All the tricks we talked here, account chooser, identifier hint, different protocols, different platforms. This is a, excuse my French, shitload of work, right? Google does offer a login as a service tool that we call the Google Identity Toolkit. It supports all the tricks we talked about here and even more we didn't have time to discuss. Well, interestingly, the one thing it doesn't yet support is the Google Smart Lock for Passwords API. But here's the cool thing. That's coming in a few months, and our current sites who use this toolkit, some of whom have used it for a few years, all they have to do is update the SDK they use in their Android app, and they get all those features with no additional work. And that's the power as login as a service offering, that this specialized vendors in identity can keep adding and improving these features, and the app developer doesn't even need to care about them. So we hope that in the future there will be a lot more login as a service offerings that have similar feature sets. Well, this was a ton of material. I hope it gives you an idea of how these different standards that you hear about this week can be stitched together. If I ran through this too fast and you want to go back and read the slides and even my speaker notes, just do a search for Google Internet Identity Research. We already have the slides online, as well as from the other Google presenters, many of whom will be presenting at a workshop tomorrow. And there's a Get a Hint session later today that talks about the identifier first stuff. But overall, I hope this was helpful for you, gives you some ideas of maybe some new tricks to try yourself or to look for in the future. And I thank you for your time, and thank Pam.